Greetings, dear friends! I present to your attention the most common malfunctions and breakdowns that occur on the Kia Cerato. Traditionally, everything is simple with Cerato 3 engines. Kia rarely indulges with any innovations. There are only two motors, both inline and 4-cylinder. The first has a volume of 1.6 liters, 130 HP, G4FG, a second volume of 2.0 liters and 150 HP, G4NA. Kia did not provide diesels for this model, although in older generations one heavy fuel unit was encountered. Gasoline units are an evolution of themselves from the past. The first generation of Cerato also had 1.6 and 2-liter G4 engines. The listed motors are installed in just a huge number of Kia and Hyundai cars, almost half of the entire model range of each of the manufacturers. Is this good or bad? The answer is not easy. On the one hand, such an approach, in theory, should allow bringing the engine to the ideal. On the other hand, there is no diversity and no evolution. But this is the way of the Korean samurai. So let's get back to our reality and begin today's debriefing with a smaller engine. The Gamma engine family, to which the first letter in the engine marking speaks, was born back in 2006. What now, what then? The cylinder block is aluminum, the liners are cast iron. That is, the bottom of the engine has not changed until now. The head of the block has 4 valves per cylinder, while the phases are variable on both camshafts, dual CVVT. Many do not know that there are no hydraulic lifters here, and according to the documentation of the car, once every 90,000 mileage, it is necessary to adjust the valve clearances by selecting washers. Yes, it's not like on grandfather's Zhiguli with keys, but nevertheless, it is very surprising in our time. And with all this, there are a number of sorrows that have not been eliminated over the course of many years of evolution and have reached the Kia Cerato 3. In general, the Gamma series engines are very tenacious, and despite the manufacturer's declared threshold to the capital of 180 to 200,000 kilometers, it can drive up to 300,000. But such a resource is possibly on condition of timely oil change and proper care of the engine as a whole. If the capabilities of the motor have dried up, then a major overhaul of this power unit is not advisable. As a rule, after it, the engine becomes prone to overheating due to the thin cylinder walls. That is, it is possible to bring the piston groove back to normal, but this approach might turn out to be meaningless. It is better to simply replace the motor. The biggest and the most common problem with G4FG is cylinder scuffing and, as a result, oil burner. Was it really impossible for so many years to do something about the misfortune? The source of the problem is the same as in so many other cars: a catalytic converter, or catalyst, as it is commonly called everywhere. As an auto picker, I know many cases when the catalyst currently passes 150 TkM and 200 TkM, and sometimes even in very fresh specimens with relatively low mileage, the catalyst begins to turn into abrasive chips closer to 50,000 kilometers. Of course, there are innumerable factors. Much depends on driving style and fuel used. Those who do not feel sick all the time in tightness and feel only good 95 gasoline and above are less at risk of sending the engine to scrap metal for recycling. When checking a car before buying, it is worth sharpening all the senses, cutting off any specimens and deviations from the normal operation of the unit. Signs of a worn-out engine are a sporadic topic of conversation for another similar article, so it is better to take a person with the necessary experience with you. Well, or immediately send to the car for cylinder endoscopy. With careful troubleshooting, these curves on the endoscope screen cannot be confused with anything. I will focus on other problems only indirectly. They are not so critical and, in principle, can be attributed to operational features. For example, vibration at low and medium speeds. At the same time, the dancing of the engine at idle can usually be easily attributed to a clogged throttle valve or flooded candles. And then you can solve with your own hands. Fill the throttle with a cleaner and change the candles. A lot of effort and time is now needed. Much more interesting is the vibration at medium revs. This problem cannot be solved by anyone in any way, and dealers assure that this is such a feature of the engine and the way it is attached to the body. Feelings are not pleasant. Everything starts to vibrate: dashboard, steering wheel, steering column. Until you release the gas or press harder on the pedal, this effect does not disappear. How is this possible on a modern car? I find it difficult to say. Is this really a matter of the resonance of the engine and the body? Maybe you just had to put hydraulic lifters at the factory to make the engine run smoother? In general, the question is for the engineers responsible for vibrodynamics. Engine sometimes suffers from oil leaks, but it does not exhaust it with constant snot, as for example the brainchild of the GM concern. Thus, the valve cover, which is tricky in its shape, likes to start leaking, and in the rear of the internal combustion engine, so that the driver does not immediately notice. But this is quite a trifle, because of which you are unlikely to give up the car. Often, when checking a car, there are snot on the front cover of the engine, chain cover. There is nothing critical here either, but already unpleasant, since the elimination work is very time-consuming. As for the timing chain itself, it usually begins to rustle to about 200,000 kilometers, but naturally with a direct dependence on how a particular Kia Cerato 3 was watched and looked after. The 2-liter engine is a bit fresher than the previous one. It was shown to the world in 2010, and over these 11 years I have already managed to see enough of it under the hoods of a whole bunch of different Koreans. And if we consider that the unit was developed with the participation of Mitsubishi and the Shariso concern, then we can say that the engine is super math, though with its own characteristics and problems inherent only in Kia and Hyundai. Technically, everything is simple and straightforward. A block head with 4 valves per cylinder, phase shifters on both shafts, a timing chain drive with almost the same as in 1.6, a resource of about 180 to 200 TkM. The thermal clearance of the valve is already in charge of hydraulic compensators, which eliminates the need for adjustment. The intake manifold has got geometry change flaps, VIS. The block is also aluminum, the liners are, of course, cast iron, but very thin. This is the main noticeable difference in design from 1.6. There are normal thick-walled cast iron sleeves. And this saving on material, I tell you, only adds to the problems. The most unpleasant malfunction is all the same badass that Koreans cannot get rid of. Or don't they really want to? Somehow, you have to be forced to buy spare parts. Moreover, the previous engine had only one source of oil loser, a chromatic catalyst. Actually, the trouble has not gone anywhere here either, but there is something else. Knock in the first or fourth cylinder. Every second car with this engine has to hear this nerve steering sound through a stethoscope. Someone drives with such a feature for 300 TkM, someone is forced to make major repairs because of the clearing oil and uneven work at 100 TkM. Unfortunately, it is not always possible to tell how long the motor has to live. Only one thing can be started unequivocally. If a loud, distinct knock persists when the engine is warm and there is a shaking at idle, then let the seller of such a car look for another buyer. The reasons for such an unstable quality are called completely different, but motorists have not received an unambiguous answer. One of the most probable is the very thin-walled cast iron sleeves, which, due to local overheating, are deformed and become oval. This version looks more like the truth. Since the problem went away with the restyling of the engine in 2017, when oil nozzles were added to cool the piston crown and lower parts of the cylinders. This means that a special role in the operation of the Kia Cerato 3 with the G4NA should be given to the cleanliness of the cooling system, the quality of the oil, and to restrain your ardor when the load is applied to the unit. Slightly rarer probable malfunction of the 2-liter is the cranking of the crankshaft liners, which is more likely to be related to the quality of the oil. If you cut the oil change interval in half, then this problem is unlikely to affect you. The engine sometimes suffers from oil leaks, but it does not exhaust it with constant snot, as, for example, the brainchild of the GM concern. Thus, the valve cover which is tricky in its shape, likes to start leaking, and in the rear of the internal combustion engine, so that the driver does not immediately notice. But this is quite a trifle, because of which you are unlikely to give up the car. Often when checking a car, there is snot on the front cover of the engine, chain cover. There is nothing critical here either, but already unpleasant, since the elimination work is very time consuming. There is nothing else critical in this motor. Many owners notice very small resource of the coolant pump. It may not leave even 40 TkM, make some noise and send an antifreeze tear to the conveyor for normal supply of spare parts. Separate paragraph of the review about the third Cerato should be devoted to chip tuning. The G4NA is one of those rare atmospheric motors that it makes sense to translate into Euro 2, since after the chip is able to add a couple of dozen horses, as they say, from scratch. At least you will be able to accelerate it to the level of foreign cars with the same engine. But how much will you lose in the resource? The question is still a philosophical one. There are few transmission options in our case, only two: mechanical for the bomb, competition and automatic for the two higher ones. Do you like to pull the handle? Love to live without climate control. Mechanical 6-speed gearbox, as expected, practically does not cause problems for the owners of the Kia Cerato 3. But there are still some systematic sources. The most unpleasant thing that can happen to it is the leakage of the input shaft oil seal, which is sure to be noted with a twitch when starting from a place. The rest of the oil seals do not leak so often. Although it happens that you come to inspect the Cerato, the engine is clean and the gearbox is oiled. Another nuisance is the wear of the shaft bearings with runs of more than 150,000. This is normal if the previous owner followed the manufacturer's instructions for 120 TkM oil change. Then you cannot change the oil at all. It will be, as it is now, fashionable for the entire service life of the mechanism, even if not long. In general, change the lubricant in the manual transmission twice as often and forget about it thousands or 300 km for sure. Also, it is often necessary to adjust the rocker. It is cable. Naturally, with an increase in mileage, the cables like to scratch. It's getting harder to find the right gears. One way or another, everything is solvable and quite inexpensive. The automatic transmission here is of its own design by the Koreans. In general, it is not bad, reliable and durable, known for the lion's share of the Kia and Hyundai's lineup. All the possible problems of the box grow from poor maintenance. This time, you need to follow manufacturer's instructions and honestly change the oil and filter every 75,000 kilometers. In general, it is a matter of oil again. I agree, this is not difficult, but will save you a decent amount of money on repairs. With proper operation and scheduled maintenance of the valve body on a mileage of 150,000, there will be no problems with this checkpoint at all. The manual for the car warns of the need for such MOT, because changing the gaskets in the valve body is also not so difficult. Repairing a box that has already begun to kick is much worse. Of the interesting features, I will not the plastic pallet of the box. Do you like to drive off the pavement? Here it is, valve considering in advance whether you are ready to call at low tow truck and then change the pallet in the event of a missing bump between the wheels. Yes, and then why did they come up with the Kia Sportage? The suspension of the third generation Kia Cerato is rudimentary. Even when compared to other Kia models, in front of the McPherson strut, in back there is a conventional semi-independent beam with springs, although a classmate named Kia seat has a multi-link in the back. Why did you decide to simplify? Apparently they wanted to make the car cheaper and at the same time save you money on suspension repairs with mileage of 150 TkM. In general, the chassis does not suffer from serious problems. Let's briefly evaluate the approximate resource of some elements of the chassis. Shock absorbers in the front usually run up to 80,000 kilometers. In the back they live quietly and more than 100,000 kilometers, if you do not carry stolen scrap metal from the construction site. Like many modern cars, Cerato loves to knock with bones, stabilize the struts, but not so often. On average, replacement is needed every 40,000 kilometers. Silent blocks of beams, levers, wheel bearings are usually replaced closer to 150,000. When looking for a used Cerato 3, it is worth paying particular attention to the steering rack. For many cars with a mileage of about 100 TkM, it often requires repair. Fortunately, the unit is quite amenable to repair and replacement of the rail assembly is not required. There is not much say about the body, and this is good. Kia Cerato 3 does not, in the usual sense, does not fall in racks, but the paint loves to swell in places. The paintwork of Koreans is traditionally quite thin. Scratches are formed easily and quickly. There are a couple of particularly popular places where corrosion loves to eat Cerato's iron. Surprisingly, these are the edges of the roof, trunk lid, and the areas under the rubber bands. Corrosion can easily crawl out from under the glued in the rear or windshield. Another interesting feature is the water in the trunk after washing or heavy rain. The rear lights were expected to be the culprit, and officially, since many owners who found a swamp in the spare wheel niche, the deal eliminated the problem under warranty. Even from the stage of acquaintance with the Kia Cerato 3 at the time of its appearance on the market, it became clear that with such a hard plastic interior, sooner or later the interior will acquire crickets. And so it happened. In summer, everything is fine, but with the onset of winter, animals wake up in the panel and in the center console. There are few questions about the appearance. Initially, the interior of the Kia Cerato 3 is very laconic, but due to the simplicity of some materials, with age, the interior fades before our eyes, usually after 80,000 kilometers. The steering wheel begins to lose its skin, and the sidewall of the driver's seat is worn out and shaggy. In some cases, the dealer even changed the upholstery and steering wheel assembly as part of the warranty. Fans of Cerato 3 also know that after restyling, the materials have become more wear resistant. On this, information about the problems of the Kia Cerato 3 is exhausted. If you know more or disagree with what you heard, I'm waiting for you in the comments.